now we take a look at news stories making headlines around the globe. National Union of Petroleum and Natural Gas Workers, NUPENG, yesterday called off its industrial action after the Department of State Services, DSS, brokered a truce between the federal government, oil industry stakeholders, and organized labor. The resolution followed a high-level meeting convened in Abuja with key government officials, representatives of Dangote Refinery, and leaders of major trade unions in attendance. But before the agreement was reached, the industrial action embarked upon by the oil workers had grounded commercial activities in several states of the Federation, subjecting motorists to long fuel queues and commuters to immeasurable hardship. Following hours of deliberation, the parties resolved to uphold existing labor laws with emphasis that employees must not be compelled to join any union and should retain the freedom to either affiliate with or decline membership of any labor body. Besides, other outstanding issues of contention were resolved, culminating in the signing of a memorandum of understanding by all stakeholders. The agreement led to the immediate suspension of NUPENG's strike action, which had threatened to disrupt petroleum supply and distribution across the country. Specifically, all parties agreed to the unionization of only employees of Dangote Refinery and petrochemicals who were willing to do so. Meanwhile, the Minister of Finance and Coordinating Minister of the Economy, Mr. Wale Edun, and the Chairman of the Presidential Committee on Fiscal Policy and Tax Reforms, Taiwo Oyedele, yesterday declared that there was no immediate plan to implement the contentious 5% fuel tax now or on January 1, 2026. Given the already high cost of living and hardship in the land, the Trade Union Congress of Nigeria, TUC, had on Monday issued a 14-day ultimatum to the federal government to rescind any plan to introduce any tax surcharge or risk a total shutdown of the economy. Edun, who addressed the press conference in Abuja, admitted that while the Tax Administration Act will become operational on January 1, 2026, the 5% fuel surcharge, which is captured in the Act, will not automatically come into effect. Also, the chairman of the Presidential Committee on Fiscal Policy and Tax Reforms, Taiwo Oyedele, yesterday maintained that the proposed 5% fuel surcharge was critical to fixing Nigeria's deteriorating road infrastructure, but maintained that no date has been fixed for the commencement of implementation. And now moving on to the National Assembly, which has formally declined Senator Natasha Akpoti-Uduaghan's request to resume her legislative duties in the Senate, despite the expiration of her 6-month suspension on September 4, 2025. The country's apex legislative institution cited a pending appeal at the Court of Appeal as the primary obstacle. Akpoti-Uduaghan, who represents Kogi Central Senatorial District, was suspended by the Senate on March 6, 2025 over allegations of misconduct. Strongly disagreeing with the Senate leadership, People's Democratic Party condemned the attempt by Clerk of the National Assembly to bar Akpoti-Uduaghan from resuming at the Senate after the 6-month suspension imposed on her by Senate President Senator Godswill Akpabio expired. It would be recalled that the Federal High Court had ruled that the suspension was excessive and unconstitutional. But a subsequent appeal filed by the Senate President prevented Akpoti-Uduaghan's reinstatement. The acting clerk further assured the senator that she would be duly notified of the Senate's decision once the legal issues were resolved. And now finally, in our news today, in the health sector, the Nigerian Association of Resident Doctors will today, Wednesday, hold its National Executive Council meeting to determine its next line of action on a pending ultimatum to the federal government. The association had earlier issued a 10-day ultimatum to relevant government agencies, warning that members would embark on a nationwide strike if their demands were not met. The threat comes amid mounting pressure on Nigeria's fragile public health system, which is already grappling with a shortage of doctors, poor infrastructure, and overcrowded hospitals. In a communiqué issued on September 1, 2025, the doctors demanded immediate payment of the outstanding 2025 Medical Residency Training Fund, settlement of 5 months arrears from the 25 to the 35% Consolidated Medical Salary Structure Review, and other long-standing salary backlogs. They also demanded the payment of the 2024 accruement allowance arrears, prompt disbursement of specialist allowances, and restoration of the recognition of the West African postgraduate membership certificates. All right. So from averting one strike, looking to a potential strike following the committee's meeting today, a cycle of strikes across the nation. Is this the way forward? But beyond that, of course, Rufai, the other stories in today's line of headlines from across the country. Okay, so let's start quickly, Oyo. I'm happy cool heads have finally prevailed. Anyway, I think we had said it on the table here yesterday that people should be allowed to willingly join any union they want to join. Yeah. So the argument of NUPENG trying to force people to join their union obviously did not hold water. And I think common sense prevailed. You can't force people because we know that hitherto NUPENG had tried to sabotage Dangote's business, and there are empirical facts to that effect of how they were not helping with the distribution of products in the first place. So this was just another attempt. Secondly, I am not comfortable with the narrative the government is putting out there as regards this 5% surcharge. And there are many things I'd like to debunk this morning. Since we returned to democracy, the argument of, the law has been on before, it's a firmer law and all of that, yes, valid, but I also want to puncture the argument, and I'll take you back historically. In 2003, Olusegun Obasanjo increased petroleum prices from 23 naira to about 40 naira. Labour kicked against it, and Olusegun Obasanjo talked about a petrol tax. The petrol tax, he said then, was to be able to cushion the effect of subsidy. So he claimed that he had removed some portion of the petrol subsidy, so it amounted to about $2 billion then, and that tax of 1 naira, 1.5 naira as of 2003 on every liter of petrol sold was to be able to pay for the subsidies that they are graduating and gradually easing out. President Tinubu were part of those that kicked against it. Labour kicked against it. They went on strike. After the strike, they finally agreed on 34 naira per litre. The petrol subsidy, the first time they talked about it in early 2000, was to be, the petrol tax was to be able to pay for subsidy. But they have put it in the bill this time around. And why I'm against TUC is that, and honestly, I think Labour and Labour unions in Nigeria should have a research department that at least checks most of these laws and scrutinizes them, so that it's not when the media is reporting it, they are now coming in retrospect to look at it. If they had had a research department that scrutinized most of this law, they would have pointed it out when the tax debate was going on. Yep. So for me, their arguments now is like medicine after death is not valid. But the point I'm trying to make is this. Olusegun Obasanjo introduced the petrol tax then to be able to pay subsidies. Today, President Tinubu has said subsidy gone, despite the fact that after saying subsidy gone, he still pays subsidy till September 2024. So when they say subsidy was gone then, the NNPC was lying to themselves, government was lying to themselves then, subsidy was being paid. And now, NNPC's claim that 7 trillion is the worth of that subsidy paid in the course of 1 year, while they were lying to themselves that subsidy was gone. So now that they finally said subsidy is gone, you are now telling Nigerians, after you told Nigerians that once you remove subsidy, the savings on the subsidy will be used to build roads and build everything and all of that. Now you're not telling Nigerians that after you said subsidy is gone and you promise them that the savings will be used to do road infrastructure and everything, you are not telling them to now pay an extra tax to now do those roads you claimed before that the subsidy that was removed will be used to do. To make the argument more interesting, the government is now telling us that out of the close to 200,000 kilometers of road we have, about 60,000 kilometers are tarred, and we have an infrastructure deficit we need to fix. Really interesting argument. I applaud you for that argument. But this government also forgot that Minister Umahi came out to say that 15 trillion will be enough to fix all the pre-existing projects of roads that have not been done. But guess what this government used the 15 trillion to do? You went to start a new road called the Coastal Road, which we all spoke about. Or you can say, okay, it has been in the works for over 40 years. You started that new road when you could have easily used that 15 trillion to fix all the existing roads you have before you started a new road of about close to how many kilometers? Over 700 kilometers. And that's why yesterday, when I was talking about cost-benefit analysis, a lot of people thought I was joking. You had the chance, even if you had that money somewhere, which I know the government did not have to expend, but you could have taken out
facilities to be able to fix the pre-existing road, we would have applauded the government. But you went ahead, you started a new road that's incurring a lot of cost, and you leave the other ones, and you say you're going to tax Nigerians, a 5% tax on petrol. For those that will quickly make arguments, and I can read every argument people are going to make this morning, they're going to cite South Africa and say they pay petrol taxes. Oh yeah, but South Africa also pays subsidy on their fuel. Most of the top African countries in the first 4 brackets, in terms of GDP, high GDP in Africa, they pay some form of subsidies. And for those that are comparing Nigeria and South Africa, heck yeah, you want to compare how much South Africa spends on infrastructure, you want to compare the budget size of South Africa. In case you want to know, the budget size of South Africa is over $125 billion. That's about 2.2 trillion rand. Our budget is just about 54 trillion. That's about $36 billion. South African budget, if you were to graduate it to Naira times, about 199 trillion. So when we make this comparison, let's go for the arguments. Lastly, the case of Natasha. I think it's crystal clear that this is just personal vendetta. Because I am not absolving Natasha, so she must provide the evidence she says she has for sexual harassment. And if she doesn't provide it, I will keep hounding her for that. But after a case had gone to court, the time for the suspension was over. After you had tried to take Senator Natasha out of the Senate through a recall process that failed, somebody will have expected that the interest of the people that she's representing will be paramount, and you allow her to come back and serve despite the fact that you have a case in court. But you are using that as a shield to block her just because she has not said sorry, right? So why must we have a society where they must always say sorry to some people because they feel like they are God? You see, and that's why I say, to a large extent, we don't practice democracy. It's a demonstration of Chris we're dealing with here.
All right. Thanks. Dr. Abati, your take on these?
Okay, let me start with Senator Akpoti Natasha Uduaghan. Now, the Senate, I think it was the clerk of the House that has now issued a statement that there are issues in court, and that those issues in court, appeals in the Court of Appeal, relating to the suspension of Senator Natasha Akpoti Uduaghan on March 6, that those issues are sub judice. However, in the course of the litigation and all of that, I think it was Justice Binta Nyanko who ruled on July 7 that the Senate also has a responsibility to look at its rules. Because if you have a senator representing a people and then you suspend her for 180 days, which is, the length of time for representation of the people, the judge, speaking obita, said, look, you have to look at that particular side of the matter. But of course, there are other cases in court, which the clerk of the National Assembly is now relying upon. So you have a senator from Kogi Central who has been suspended for what they called gross misconduct since March 6. And now we're in September. The 6-month suspension expired September 4. And you now say, well, she cannot still come back because, the matters in court will have to be determined. However, now, the point is this, that the people who are suffering are the people that she's representing, the people of Kogi Central. They've been denied representation. And Mrs. Uduaghan is saying that, look, there are issues. There are things she wants to pursue. Now she has not been given that opportunity, now that they are saying there's still a case in court. The third point, critical point in that regard, is that the Senate is in recess. The Senate being on recess is not going to return until September 23. So whatever all this conversation is all about, nothing can happen before September 23. What may well happen post 2020, September 23 is that the leadership of the Senate must come together and then say, well, we have this matter before us, and then we look at it. Number 2 subject, the Dangote matter. Now there's a narrative out there, which is the narrative of NUPENG, Petron, of Labour, saying that the Dangote refinery has now agreed to have unionization. I made the point yesterday. I don't know why we were bringing this subject back. I made the point yesterday that under international labor ILO rules, if you have over 50 plus 1 persons, then you can have a union. Now, it seems to me that, the Dangote group, they've created their own union. They have their own workers who want to be part of a union. This refinery driving trucks association, whatever name they call it. They already have it. And so the other point is that the right to join a union is voluntary. You also have the Petroleum Tankers Drivers Association of Nigeria, the PTD, saying that they don't believe in the leadership of NUPENG. So there's a lot of crisis in that regard. But the residual point, which I think is more important, is the Nigerian government, the DSS, the Ministry of Labor, the Ministry of Petroleum, moving into this matter. They had a meeting on Monday. Some people said they had ulcer. They wanted to go and eat. They had another meeting yesterday that was held in the DSS office. And the DSS made it very clear that they cannot afford any disruption in the oil and gas sector. Whatever your right is, whether you belong to free trade zone, whether you belong to union, we do not want a disruption. Some disruptions have been reported, but it is good to hear that, look, the federal government, the DSS, they succeeded in saying that, look, there must be peace. However, Dangote refinery is saying, we pay our workers well, they will not join a union, we are running an investment, whatever, and that investors, lenders will be concerned if you create a situation whereby union can just come and disrupt operations. As I said yesterday, now that the subject has been brought again, there can be accommodation. They can, all these people, they can talk to each other. They are all in the business. But the part of it that is important to us is that we as Nigerians, we don't want disruption at the fuel stations. We don't want a situation where we will not be able, to buy fuel. What is the other subject? There were about 5.
Resident Doctors Association.
Well, resident doctors, look, they are asking about arrears. They are talking about their allowances. Government should listen to them. It should not just be about oil and gas. These are people who are perpetually going on strike because they've not been paid their allowances. One doctor, after working for over 72 hours, collapsed the other day and died. Doctors are there to save lives. We should not kill them in the process of saving lives. And what are they asking for? They're asking for their allowances. They're asking for their arrears. And resident doctors constitute the majority of healthcare workers in this country. And yet this country treats them badly. And we have had a minister in this country once upon a time who said, you can go where you like. We have more than enough doctors. Do we have enough specialists? Do we have enough persons to treat Nigerians? So it looks like a case of gross irresponsibility on the part of government. And we have a right to support the people who are saying they deserve their wages, whether they are police pensioners or they are military pensioners, or they are resident doctors, or they are nurses and midwives. Nurses and midwives have also had cause to protest. And I make the point that the people who are in service, they often forget that they will also end up as retirees.
All right, let me start with the doctor strike, since that's where Dr. Batis concluded. We talked about, and we've been speaking about this a number of times, about the condition of service for resident doctors. In fact, not just in Abuja, across the country. We have highlighted the massive brain drain through the Japa syndrome of the very best of our medical professionals, whether they be doctors or nurses, midwives, or just along the value chain of medical professionals. We've highlighted that there is a brewing crisis, not just on this table. Professionals, presidents of groups, associations have come out to talk about the massive brain drain and how Nigerian doctors are just one step away from going abroad or to other parts of the world to get a better chance of their livelihoods or their good payments of service, better conditions of service in terms of their working. And I've even compared the fact that they are not just not going to Western countries, even across the African continent. A number of them are going to Ghana, going to South Africa, because in these countries, they get better paid for their service. There's recognition, there's respect, there's dignity of service. Only earlier this year, in January 2024, the Association of Resident Doctors in Abuja and the FCT embarked on a one-week warning strike over the same issues around payment of arrears, payment of salaries, better working condition. Down the line, this is 9 months down the line, and we are still plagued with the same issue. Quite frankly, I don't think a lot will come out from their meeting today, and so it's very likely that they're going to embark on this strike. What is the government doing about this? Like Dr. Bati mentioned, we're putting money into infrastructure, we're having fuel taxes, we have roads and all that. But if we don't handle the critical needs of health, shelter, well-being, education for the citizens, who are the people that will ply these roads that we are fixing? It is a shame to see that we are pushing more and more our best brains from staying back in the nation. If you go to a lot of the hospitals, the person that will attend to you, unfortunately, might not even have the requisite time of service or qualification to attend to you, but we have to make do with what we have currently. It is a sad situation. I'm hoping that the government will pay attention to this critical part of our society and meet their demands. Pay up their arrears. The monies that we talk about revenue generation, meeting the target, and the big question had always been, when we talk about revenue generation from this administration, what is it being used for? At the moment, the citizens don't feel the impact. The critical sectors of the nation don't feel the impact. So where exactly is the revenue going to? Is it going to awarding contract upon contract to friends and family members for road constructions so that in their way there's some money? So what are we really doing about the revenue generation that we've been talking about and applauding this administration about? Moving on to this administration and the Dangote strike, I maintained right from the very beginning that one of the challenges or main challenges for NUPENG was the unionization or lack of allowance of their members who were going to sign up as drivers for these new CNG trucks purchased by Dangote Refinery to join a union. And we've highlighted the importance of this again and again. I think just to buttress the point around the fact that when we talk about, and I like that there's a clause for voluntary association, so the drivers cannot be mandated to join NUPENG or any other oil or NLC labor unions. But I think it's now important to probe these unions as to how effective they are to the workers. To what extent do they represent the interest of the workers? I believe that when the people begin to demand for better service and better representation, not just calling off strikes and going to negotiation tables and not coming anything substantial for the people that they represent, then it would be better for them to really come to the table and say, if you're not doing it well for us, if you're not doing it good for us, then there's no need joining a union that is just there because it is the norm or it is okay to join the union. So the spotlight now is to strengthen strengthen these unions to make them attractive enough for the workers to want to voluntarily join them and to hold them to account. When last were their books audited? When last did we check how much money they were getting or allowances? When last did we check the administration of these unions? These are some of the questions we should be asking for, because the only time, oftentimes, we hear of these unions is when it's time to call for a strike, when it's time to hold the country to ransom because one or two people or some people at the leadership level feel like their interests have not been put into consideration. We cannot continue to hold the country to ransom based on people who ought to be doing that. We remember the union days of Comrade Adams Oshiomhole, when they would go out to protest and the government would actually listen, where we would see the results based. Which results have we had in recent times based on the unions? Is it salary, minimum wage? Is it the refineries that are working? Is it the agitation for better living conditions for Nigeria? Where have we seen the impact of these unions in the area of action following a strike action? And that is why sometimes when they come out again, and I'm putting it to them this morning very strongly, because we need to represent the Nigerian workers better, not just to call for strikes, not just to go on strikes, but to actually ensure that those strike actions that affect national security in some instances actually do good for the people and the nation of Nigeria. Finally, on Senator Natasha Akpoti-Uduaghan, I believe that under this administration, one point I'd like to mention, if I have to pick all the points I want to say this morning, is what's happened in the interim? What happened to the investigation? We cannot have a senator of the Federal Republic of Nigeria come out to make strong allegations against the Senate president, and then we sweep it under the carpet and we're focusing on technicalities. We demand that the investigation panels that were said to be would be set up to dig deep and find out what really transpired between the two parties, and of course with Senator Natasha Akpoti-Uduaghan presenting evidence and the Senate president also presenting himself for investigation should happen. This is important for our democracy, and I just wanted to mention that in all of this, let's not forget the critical aspects of these issues.